Good morning, everyone. July 28th behavioral model call. I will go ahead and share my screen here. So here we are in the behavioral model project. These are the items we have. We're all kind of working on, etc. Did anyone have an update to their item? Who's on the call? Sorry, I'm trying to monitor a couple of windows at the same time.
I don't have any update, but I think we have outstanding pull requests and some new that came since last meeting.
Let me stop. You want to present those, Marian?
No, I think the author should present. Let me see, what do we have there?
Okay.
VJ, I guess there is one.
Yeah.
Can you present yours? Explain what's the idea behind it?
Sure. It's not sharing.
Let me know if you need help, VJ. I can pull it up or share. Good.
Can you guys see the window?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. So this pull request is basically addressing the changes that we discussed last week about bringing the VNET table to the pipeline. So the changes here are basically to add a VNET table to the outbound pipeline and also drive VNET IDs from the ENI table. And route lookup also drives a destination VNET ID for the VNET table lookup. And we, as part of this, we can also remove the ENI to VNI table because now that is redundant. And we also have an option to choose which VNET ID drives the final VNI in the outbound direction based on the Boolean coming from the mapping. So all these changes are bringing the behavior model in line with gNMI, as we discussed in the last week's call. So I think, Marian, you already took a look at the PR, and I saw your comments. Yeah, I had a few follow-up questions on that. So I think the first one is the handle IDs. You mentioned that they're 32-bit. Yeah, I think we were just following the existing ENI ID, and we noticed that those are 16-bit. So that's why I just kept the VNet ID also as 16-bit. So is this something that you want me to address in this PR, or should we just move all 16 to 32 in a separate one?
That's so the reason specifically why I noticed this one is that because theoretically we may have, I don't believe it will be a case, we may have more VNets, but really we will be restricted roughly to the number of ENIs. So probably let's just leave it as is. Right now API generation does not really depend on that. So I think I would withdraw this comment. It's not really relevant. We can stay with 16 bits.
Okay, sure. Okay, so just moving on, I think this part is just removing the redundant table. And yeah, I've just retained this logic. So here, I think we had just one question. We noticed that you were doing this kind of this bit logic here instead of a simple if-else if condition. So I was just wondering, why is that? Isn't the if condition a bit simpler?
If condition is not allowed in actions by the compiler because usually it assumes that actions have just a list of operands they do not perform.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I tried with the simple if condition with just setting the VNet ID. That seemed to be okay for the compiler.
Inside an action?
But I think, sorry?
inside the action, like uncomment?
Yeah. Yeah, just uncomment that one, and without the else, because yeah, the else is redundant. If we just say if boolean and then this VNet ID to dest VNet ID, that seems to be fine.
Okay, maybe they updated the compiler, because I did that specifically because of the limitation that running.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I mean, yeah, we can leave it as is. So yeah, I think. Do you want me to change it or just leave this current logic?
Of course, you can change it to if statements.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be more simpler to follow. Yeah. Moving ahead. So now, yeah. So there is a dest VNet ID which becomes the key to the CA to PA mapping table, and there's also the VNet table where the VNet table is keyed with the VNet ID. And the main thing here is that the VNet ID logic to choose the VNet ID lies within the action routine for the mapping table. So that's based on the Boolean coming in the mapping table. So I think all this is mapping to what the gNMI is asking us to do. And I think moving forward, I think you had a comment on this this particular comment. So I think I just expanded it. So yeah, I think I got the fact that you were basically saying probably it was too brief, the comment. So I just added more detail. So VMVNI is basically only the NCAP VNI, which is used for the tunnel between the inbound DPU and VM. So it's not a VNet identifier. So I just wanted to bring it out here.
Outbound both ways.
Okay. Yeah, because I think because they're VNI and a VNet ID statement, so I thought just to make it clear, we'll just add a comment here. Okay, so the last one is basically, yeah, now that the ENI to VNI table is gone, so the test had to be updated. So I removed the ENI to VNI table entry creation function and added the VNet create. But I hit one issue here where the yeah, I think right now we can't have we can't create entries for tables using object IDs because the P4 control plane is not yet doing the object ID allocation. So I think Mukesh's PR is addressing that change in the AutoGen. So yeah, when I made this change, I hit yeah, it crashed in the CI run. So that's why I left it commented out for now.
Mm-hmm. Which PR are you talking about?
I think Mukesh has another PR as part of the ACL group changes that addresses the object ID allocation in the P4 control plane.
Yeah, so Marian, this was the PR which we had split into two. So originally the PR had both an ACL group and an ACL group test also, right? So as part of that, I had to fix the ACL for the ACL group, which was an object-based table, object ID. So I had to fix that part because it was not filling the object ID into the P4 table. But as part of the split, I think now that has so the current PR only has the SAI 100 changes. So the test changes for the ACL group is going to be in a separate PR, which has not been raised yet.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, that's about it for this one. Yeah, I think with these changes, we are in line with the gNMI with respect to VNet ID and VNet table.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if Prince is on the call, that there is still some pending change with regards to inbound. How do we identify VNet? So we're working on that. But this as standalone change looks good to me, unless anyone else has any questions.
I just wanted to ask about the comment that was made a minute ago about there's going to be a test case PR coming. Is that
Yeah.
did I hear correctly? So you're going to do some side thrift tests or what?
So no, it was just the VNet out. We were adding more objects there.
Okay, more objects. Are you going to change
Yeah, because
anything too? That will. Is there any breaking change?
no. So as we add objects into the P4, we're trying to add tests also for that in the VNet out.
Okay, great. You know, you could also, if you felt it so inclined, you could try to add like a PTF test case or a Pi test case and try your hand at that if you want, because the translation is pretty direct. In fact, I started with the VNet out case as my C++ code as my starting point, and then just experimented until I figured out how to do a side thrift test case. So if you want to try that, it might be a good, good starting point to plant those seeds.
Sure.
Because eventually,
I think once our existing PRs get merged and stuff, we can start looking into more and more of those.
The libsci, I call them the libsci test in C++. It's good to test the table accessors. I think that's, not a bad place to make sure the API works. But if we want to do a functional test with tables and traffic, we'll have to start doing side thrift tests of some sort. And I don't want to distract from other PRs we need to review, but we need to talk at some point about how to get the data plane up to the point where it's properly dropping packets and sending them out the right ports and actually obeying the rules. Right now, the loopback tests that I do, they're only passing because the data plane's not quite right yet. It's echoing packets out port 1 and it's not dropping packets that should drop. So as soon as we fix the data plane, those tests will fail. We need to talk about that at some point. It's kind of some technical debt. You know what I'm talking about, right, Marian? Yeah. So we'll handle that in due time, but probably within the next couple of weeks, we really got to kind of get that working.
So, Marian, the one more, basically, I had one more PR. This was, I think this is pending from 2 weeks. This is basically the duplicate append. It just needs to be merged, I guess. We have approval from you and Chris.
Okay, if there was no more comments, we can approve that. What number is it?
Just a second.
We can merge that.
Yeah, 149.
149. Okay.
Yeah, if we merge that, I'll merge it into my dev branch.
Cool. Thanks.
Marian, how about the 141?
Yeah, I need to look at it one more time after you did all the changes.
Sure.
Do that today. So last time we discussed it offline was that metadata for attributes needed to be changed a little bit, right? From condition to valid only to generate the right SAI APIs.
Yeah. I made that change. So now the metadata is going through. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look, and if everything's fine, I'll go and merge.
And then we also have 152.
What's 152 about?
Actual group text to text.
Attached, detached to ENI.
Yeah, but last time
Want to open it?
we talked about it. I suggested to split it into 2 different pull requests, or did you do everything in one?
No, yeah, that's already split. So all that changes are done, and I also tried the metadata thing with this one as well. It's clean now.
The number of the second. So one is 152. What's the other one?
I haven't raised the other one yet, because once this goes in, I'll have to build on top of this.
I see. Yeah, you can still open a pull request. Just this one will be merged, and we will rerun CI for the second. That's it.
Okay, so then I'll have to include this commit in also in the other pull request, right? Because that is on top of this.
Oh, I see. Okay, then I'll make sure to review those both of them today. I already did, but not after the latest changes. So I will do it one more time and merge them.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
I wanted to pass on also some advice about pull requests, and I found this out through my own experience in the last few weeks. Sometimes you file a PR and it fails the pipeline, not only in your local branch, but then if it's a PR already, it's going to fail in the main repo, and the actions in the main repo will show everything that you push to that pull request. And sometimes you get in this mode where you're experimenting to try to fix things, and you push it and it fails again, and then it shows up in your actions and in the main repo actions. So one way to, let's say, avoid filling the main repo's actions pipeline with, let's say, incremental attempts and fixes and fails, just make check out a new branch in your own dev environment, like call it, version B, your branch. Just do a git checkout -B and rename it. And then you can start pushing that to your local branch and fix it. And it won't show up in the main repo while you're doing all that, trial and error, which I've been through this where I had a lot of trial and error. And then when you're done and it's working in your own, let's say, branch B, merge it back into the pull request branch you're doing and push that. And that way you've got kind of a nice clean build in the main pipeline, and all the trial and error in your own pipeline doesn't really have to show up. And I can write an email about this, laying it out if people want to know. It only takes a minute, but it saves a lot of, let's say, noise in the pipeline. Does anyone need any more explanation of that, or people get that?
But why is it a problem to just run pipeline in GitHub?
No, it's in GitHub. It's just going to be in your own fork. It'll show up while you can hide all the sausage making from the main repo's pipeline, so to speak. Like let's say you're going, oh gosh, that doesn't work, and you're doing some trial and error. You can just check out a branch in your own dev that's just called something else and do a bunch of experiments. When you push them, it'll show up in your own GitHub pipeline in your branch, your fork, but it won't go into the Azure repo. And then you merge it back into your real pull request branch and push that, and then it will show up in the Azure repo. Does that make sense, or is that still too confusing? Maybe I'll write an email and describe it. But I used that to success recently and let me do a bunch of trial and error without having it to show up. When you push to the Azure repo, it also can end up building Docker files and things. It's more expensive.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed was when I did it on my repo, like you said, in my private repo and a private branch, I saw that the CI runs were still triggered. So I was just wondering, is that even necessary? Because like you said, those are all like TBD items, right?
Well, if you've already submitted a pull request of your branch, then it's inextricably linked to the main repo, and it's just considered a delta to the pull request, and it's going to rerun CI. You've already tied your fates together. So what I'm saying is the way to uncouple that is to check out a branch right in your working space. Just name it something different, version fix B or VNET B, whatever. And then you can push those changes. They won't show up in Azure repo because you're no longer tied to that pull request. But then you can merge it right back to your other branch instantly, and there won't be any problems because they're so close to each other. And then push that again. So it's kind of like, I'm going to go off and do this on the side for a while no one's looking, fix it, and then push it again. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I made that mistake early on, doing a pull request early and then doing all my trial and error in that pull request instead of going off to the side, and I learned from that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with filling the pipeline. It's just free CPU cycles, but it tends to show up, look alarming when there's lots and lots of red check mark, X marks in the repo and people wonder what's going on.
Maybe you could record a little video of how you're doing it and give it to us,
Yeah, I can do that. That's not a bad
like a
idea.
2-minute snip or something.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
good idea. Well,
You know me, full of good ideas.
yeah,
Why
I can
not?
also probably describe it in just a couple paragraphs for the video. Maybe I'll try that.
Some people
since
are
you're-
visual learners.
Yeah, since we are talking about GitHub etiquette, when we submit a PR that addresses a certain issue, is there a way of linking them, or should we just submit the PR by itself and then mention somewhere that it's addressing the issue? Or is there a way to start from the issue to then submit the PR?
Oh, it's easy. In the PR, you just say fixes and then copy the URL to the pull request,
Okay,
and it will show
Okay.
up as number 48.
right.
And then,
right.
and then in the PR, it'll say this PR was mentioned. I mean, this in the issue, it'll mention this issue. This issue was mentioned in PR whatever, and so they get linked by GitHub automatically.
Okay,
It's smart enough to find the URLs and realize there's an association.
okay, thanks, Chris, yes.
Yeah, the minimum comment for a PR is fixes, then the link,
Yeah,
right? And when it's real mundane stuff, people do that often.
thanks.
Did you see the PR I put in the chat window, Marian?
So is there anything else that anyone wants to present? Any pull request?
Well, Saad
Todd
has
had one. Yeah.
Okay. We have the author? Oh, we do.
Todd, are you ready?
Hello.
Hello.
Are you referring to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I also have this this little PR. Can you please open it,
Sure, no problem.
or should I open it? Or
I can do it. It's number 160, right?
Yeah.
Support for.
Yeah. This one.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a little limitation in the current code. There was a little limitation in the current code. Basically, the current code does not take into account, parser does not take into account IPv4 optional headers. It simply extracts IPv4 plain header and tries to jump straight to UDP or TCP. So this PR fixes this little problem. Aside from this, I have also mentioned steps for how did I test the correctness of this change set. And can you open the changes?
Yeah.
First. So I added a header and could just scroll down. Added a new header for IPv4 options in the headers, and then made some straightforward changes in the parser such that it takes into account IPv4 options before jumping to the layer 4 headers. And finally, there is a little line. Please scroll a little more. Finally, there is a little change in the deparser for IPv4 options. And the way I tested it, the correctness is I basically sent a bunch of packets in and out of the model, and I tested the logs of the parser and examined the contents of the packets coming out for the parser. That's it.
Yeah, it's good that you caught this. I haven't looked at IPv4 option parsing in a long time in terms of just what's out there in the wild. A lot of people have done this. Does this pretty much line up with the technique a lot of other implementations use, especially
Yes,
line 44?
Yes, I actually found a similar example in the P4 spec document, and I kind of adapted that here.
Nice. We probably should make a note to create some test cases for this, functional test cases. This would be a great example. So if you want to do that, that would be welcome, maybe as a follow-on. And then we need to figure out what changes in the model are required to actually test this properly. Yeah, do we have to I noticed you made some comments. You had to kind of hack the code in order to get the test case to work.
Yes. So I basically, since this code is only related to parser and deparser, so I basically I emptied out the pipeline code because that is irrelevant, and I simply changed it such that it receives packet and sends it out to the port 1, because I'm only interested in parser and deparser. So that is how I tested it right now. But yeah, I can try to make test cases.
I would think right now, given that we have these echo loopback tests that work, they just packets in, go in and out. You should be able to do the same thing, use the existing pipeline. Look at one of the PTF test cases that does the echo, right? It sends a packet in and looks at it coming back. You should be able to use that and then send different TCP option headers, and you could create them in SCAP probably.
Yes.
So if you want to try that, and you know, you can always hit me up offline too if you want to try that. That would be nice. Start building up some functional tests like that. Just little exemplar tests. Then later we can get a few different type of example tests here and there. People will be able to look at them and just cut and paste, kind of a rinse and repeat. It'll become kind of mechanical and easy. It won't be a burden, just routine stuff.
What's the next
sure, I can do
steps
that.
what's the next steps on this PR then? Just so I can remember.
I think the next step would be to have people review and approve it. I don't think we have to have test cases, although it would be great to have some. That
We've
of course
got
they
four.
won't. Pardon me.
We have 4 reviewers here.
Yeah, so I
I added them. I actually didn't know what to do. I simply added a bunch of
Fine.
people. So
doesn't hurt to ask.
So are one of these 4 gonna review then?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Now, Mukesh, do you have your hand up still, or is that like a old hand?
No, I had a few questions that I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
So this is in the gNMI, the HLD gNMI model, and the P4 behavior model. Maybe I'll share my screen.
Sure.
So I have a few questions. So first question I had was so the ENI table points to a QoS property table, and then the QoS has a bandwidth attribute in the HLD and the gNMI. So my question is this for the inbound or outbound direction? The bandwidth, is it supposed to be for the inbound or outbound, or should we have a separate attribute?
Yeah, it's both RX and TX.
So the same bandwidth applies to both?
Yeah, both directions.
So typically, the same PPS would be used for both directions for a given ENI, is it?
Right, but there is a good thing you mentioned. There is a bug in behavioral model. Not really a bug, a wrong name at the moment. It says PPS instead of bandwidth. So the units assume packets and not bits per second. Should be bits per second. Yeah, I'll fix that as well.
Is this like a cumulative thing, or in each direction it's limited to that bandwidth? What is the understanding?
So I think you should treat it as a full duplex port, right? You have TX bandwidth. If you have, let's say, 100 gigabit port, right? You have 100 gigabit TX and 100 gig RX.
I see. Yeah, usually in other platforms, for example, there is a, for example, if you were putting a policer, there is a TX policer and an RX policer, which potentially can have different quantities, right? Different parameters.
Right.
So
but if you think what ENI means, ENI is a virtualized port of the NIC, right?
Right.
So the modeling of bandwidth is kind of after the physical port.
Correct. So would it make sense, like in other networking devices, there is a TX police and an RX police on a port? Would it make sense to have a TX bandwidth and a RX bandwidth, or some policer specification in the TX direction and the RX direction differently?
I didn't see, at least in SAI for switch, I didn't see separation between those two. There is just one bandwidth.
I see. I haven't looked at this. I was looking at other. Maybe we can look at.
Okay, so for now, I guess we'll go with a single bandwidth for both directions, identical bandwidth for both directions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think from a policing thing, it would look like from the hardware perspective, it would look like not cumulative, but it's whatever is the bandwidth specified in TX direction and the same thing replicated in the reverse direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then I had a question about the inbound flow. So the latest update from Prince in the HLD has this line that priority-based routing rule lookup. So I'm not sure what exactly that priority-based routing rule means, but it also says that so there is a VNI and source PA prefix-based thing, and it maps to a VNet. So yeah,
Mukesh, I have one suggestion about that. Can we delay this question till next week? Because I'm working on pull request to the behavioral model that will also include explanation what is the motivation for that.
I see. Okay, but just to understand, so how is the packet flow going to be in the inbound?
Yeah, so basically we need to map the packet to a VNet, right? On the inbound as well.
I see. Okay.
So, yeah, but we cannot really do it for VNI because VNIs may overlap. So that's why there is both looking at PA prefix and VNI and finding out what the VNet is. So that's just to the check.
Okay. Okay.
Like if you do from VNet to VNI in the outbound, you know for sure what the VNI is, right? Because always maps to one VNI. VNet maps always to one VNI. But if you're receiving packet, especially like if you go from different region and so on, there are so many clients and so many cloud customers and VNets, so that you don't have enough VNIs and VNI may overlap. So you need to look at two things to identify your VNI. That's why there is a further change in the inbound. And other than that, there will be, again, after that, you have a PA validation as it is today. You need to add a proper VNet mapping in the inbound.
Okay. So from what you're saying, what I understand is that based on the VNet derivation in the inbound would not just be based on VNI, but it would be based on the source PA and the VNI.
Yeah.
And then based on that VNet, there would be a PA validation.
Yeah. Something like that.
Okay. Okay. So we'll look out for your explanation next week then. So for the behavioral model itself, I had one, or the SAI API actually. So the PA validation table is a separate SAI API, right? But from what I understand, it's just a reverse of the, or just whatever information is already provided in the mapping table is all you need to implement the PA validation functionality. So do we even need a separate SAI API there?
Well, yeah, because it's not really the reverse. It's performing different things. And
not the reverse. Yeah, so basically what it's doing is for a given VNet, it's for a given customer address, it's checking whether the received PA address is the same as the one in the mapping table. Right.
Yeah. Right.
So current P4 code doesn't actually verify the customer address part of it. It only verifies for a given VNI, is this PA allowed?
Yeah.
So, but probably we need to extend that to say for a given customer address, this is the expected provider address.
I don't think so. I believe there was a reason for that. I don't remember it. I can also.
Okay, because in the HLD, again, if you see this line here, it says source PA address is validated against the list of mappings.
Do we have a?
Sorry?
Do we have prints on the call? Is the HLD? Clarify that.
We do
Don't
not
think
have
so.
prints.
Okay, so I will clarify. I believe we don't need to look at the CA.
Okay. Yeah, so in either case, my question was either one is we need to extend the behavioral model functionality to include CA. And the second one is, do we even need a separate SAI API for this? Because all the information is already there in the mapping table.
Yeah, because it's simpler to do it that way. It's not like you have the exact same, right? Your action parameters become key, and your key becomes kind of like, on the PA validation, you take action parameter, one of the action parameters, and you put it in the key. So it's not really one-to-one, and it will be really hard. So there is no way to heuristically kind of derive that table implementation from a single API. There is no way. So you would need to put some additional annotation, stuff like that. So to not overcomplicate the behavioral model, let's just have two tables, two APIs. Could follow simple.
Okay, so this is just because of the behavioral model, we are introducing one more API inside. So
yeah, and that's why we have work agent that can later on, based only on the mapping table, figure out that it needs to also program the PA validation entry. That's what work agent is for.
okay,
You can put all the heuristics there.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, in terms of just so this is an extra SAI API call from the orchestrator point of view, right? In the general philosophy of reducing the number of SAI API calls, is this are we like introducing a redundant table or a redundant SAI API call is another question.
Also, I'm worried about. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go on. Sorry, CSMSCD is the collision back off is not working. So also, I'm also worried about the implementation itself, right? So if there are redundant calls, which is updating the same data, and it makes sense in the implementation for most of the implementations to put it in one table to save resources. If you have two different SAI API calls, I think trying to dedo, make sure it's all the same, there is no contradictory information between the two, creates a burden on the implementation. Right. I understand from the behavioral model, but eventually I think whatever is the SAI calls will end up going to the actual implementation in hardware, right? And I'm also looking from that perspective also, does it make sense to reduce the number of, if it is redundant information in two tables, why have two tables if it can be done in one?
Yeah, this falls into that category of kind of design rules for this.
Yeah, I understand what you are trying to do is to have them in the implementation done kind of as a single entry, something like that. I'm not sure if it will be always the case, because there also may be the case where we either, well, again, I'm not sure. I don't have the full understanding yet, but is it always true that we install a PA validation entry, or maybe will there be a need to install PA validation entries for mappings that do not exist in some cases, not in this VNet use case? But beyond that, because PA validation is not really that related only to CA to PA mappings. It's a security feature against spoofing the addresses.
So how would you're saying the ARC agent would make the decision as to whether to populate the CA to PA, I mean the PA validation or not, because there's nothing in the gNMI model to make that differentiation. Right?
I'm saying it
There's
may
only
not
one.
be only to CA to PA map.
Sorry?
I'm saying that in the future, it may not be limited only to CA to PA mapping table.
I'm not sure I understood that comment. So
Yeah, because
I was
validation has a potentially broader scope than just with regards to CA to PA mappings. PA validation may be done for other reasons if PA is not really related to CA to PA mapping done on the other side. PA may mean something else in the network.
Okay. So
okay. Would it make
but
sense
yeah,
to
but
keep
where
it,
would that information come from is my question, right? Because there's nothing in the gNMI for this. The gNMI only has a mapping table, and our current assumption is that there it will actually.
gNMI right now describes only VNet to VNet use case. I don't know if in the future it will be extended to something else that will again require PA validation for something else.
Okay. Okay.
yeah, it would make sense to keep it as a unified thing now, and then once we get the use case, we expand. I'm purely seeing from how to map the SAI APIs to an implementation, right? That's my only worry, right? I think eventually this has to get to the hardware from this thing, and the way we are going.
Yeah, but that's why we have one API for all, so that it is, let's say, as simple as possible. We have the same issue. I know what you're talking about, but I wouldn't want to be to try to make SAI only for the reason to simplify the SAI implementation. That's the reason why we have SAI implementation. Otherwise, we could just, I don't know, come up with something else.
Okay, but would it be good to kind of know if there is something like that coming in before we decide to keep it? Because if we are not sure if there is ever going to be a case where there is PA validation beyond what is there in CAPA, then we probably don't need it, right? We're just keeping it there for unknown reasons.
Yeah, I
if
think
we can get a confirmation, yeah. Okay, yeah, if we can get a clarification as to.
Hey, sorry folks, I joined late.
Hey.
What is the question on CA PA validation? Is something
so there
missing
are
in the HLD?
A couple of questions there. One is the PA validation has to happen against a specific CA address, which means like we are going to look up for a given VNet for this. If the packet is received with this customer address, CA address, then it has to come from this particular provider address. Is that the validation that's supposed to happen, or?
No. I think it is basically when you get a packet, you have to see whether that PA belongs to that VNet, like in the CA-PA mapping table, whether that PA exists. It's not about CA matching the PA. It's about the validation of PA in that table.
Okay, but while sending in the outbound, we know that the CA is in this is processed by this PA, right?
Right.
So I thought the reverse is what we are checking. Basically, when we receive a packet, we need to check whether this customer address is correct. So we are aren't we actually validating that this customer address is coming from the PA that we said it belongs to?
No.
Okay, because that line in this line is what I was looking at in the HLD. It says using the VNet mapping table, source PA
mapping is validated against the list of mappings.
The list of mappings.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like validated against the CA. It's against the list of mappings.
Yeah, I thought it was validated for that particular mapping entry, which has a CA also.
No.
So you're saying if it matches any PA in that mapping table.
In the whole table?
Yeah.
In the whole table. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. And so today in the pipeline, we have it based on VNI. So depending on the incoming VNI, we can either choose to do that validation or not. Is that how we want it? Or? Actually, there are overarching questions in the inbound direction, but I think Marian said there is some change going on in the inbound direction in the pipeline.
Okay.
So maybe this needs a discussion, more discussion at least.
Okay, so
I think
Marian, do we have things covered in the HLD, or is it
Well, you remember the yeah, you covered that in the HLD, but I don't think that you added. That's what I wanted to ask you. I don't think that you added this table that Michael was talking about and that you described verbally. Is that to identify the VNet in inbound direction, we need to look at the PA prefix and VNI.
Yes.
I didn't see that table in AppDB schema.
So you didn't see when to do the lookup. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, how will we program those entries with prefixes plus VNI? There is no schema for them. How will controller program them?
I thought that's still open, right? I think we need to. Okay, I see. I think that part is not closed.
Are we waiting for input from Michael still?
Let me sync back with Michael and see what they want to program there. Yeah, I'll update the HLD for that.
Yeah, and what is this priority-based routing rule, Prince?
Oh, so it is not an LPM lookup. It is like a routing kind of read it as routing rules.
So what exactly is the lookup based on? It's not clear as to how the actual forwarding happens in the inbound. Outbound is pretty clear. Inbound is not that clear. Like what is looked up, what is derived.
So you have the VNI and the source PA, right? And then we will think of it like we will have some rules in a table, right? Like for VNI X and prefix this, then take this action. And then for the next one, you will have maybe VNI and prefix
PA.
Yeah, PA prefix. So you will have like set of rules. So it's not like you match the best rule out of it. It will be based on priority. Like you will look into the first rule, and if it matches, then take that action. So
Okay.
yeah, so in what I'm saying is in the outbound where we have a proper LPM lookup, in the inbound you don't have an LPM table. So that's why I rephrased it from routing table to routing rules. So it cannot be, it should not be confused with the routing table or the LPM table. Yeah.
So I guess, Marian, this is the one you said you're going to be working on, right?
Hmm.
In the P4. Okay.
Is it okay if I share my screen real quick?
I had one last question.
Sure. But I'm just saying, I'm hoping I have priority correct here in the inbound slow path. You know, as we're going through, we check on these and then the priority here.
That's the ACL table, and then comes the inbound route processing, right? Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah,
Sure.
Christine, do we have our documentation where it actually shows the difference between the longest prefix match on the egress, but on the ingress we have just a forwarding table? Did we document it right, or do we need to update all the documents too?
We have the explanation of the routing, you know, at the bottom here.
No, I heard that it's different on ingress and egress. I don't think we have it documented.
Let's look here. So on ingress, so you mean like the inbound fast or slow path?
No, the forwarding lookup. He just said that it's different on ingress versus
The
egress.
inbound,
That
yeah, the
egress
inbound
is LPM and ingress is just a forwarding table. Not sure what the difference is, but
Look up the
I don't think we've
fold.
documented that at all.
So in lookup tables per ENI, each route entry is prefix.
So here, can you go to the outbound? What is it saying like in the outbound route processing?
Sorry, I'm trying to find it real quick.
I think
This
that's
is
the
inbound.
problem.
So outbound fast or
I don't think you
outbound
have
slow
a-
path?
Outbound slow, outbound slow.
Outbound slow. That's
Let's
down
see.
here. Okay. So look up the flow table. ACL.
No, this is inbound, right?
Set DSCP to X, process relevant route.
I'm not sure. Perform outbound slow path, and then it says inbound route processing. So yeah, I think I agree with Gerald. Maybe something is missing here.
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to go back to this and get this one right, because it's gonna, if we're gonna change the behavioral model, we want our documentation to match. And I think this was a miss on that. So you can maybe just take an action on that, Christina, but we will have to update this to reflect what he's talking about. Ingress and egress being slightly different that way.
Okay. Marian, I'll get with you on that.
And then the other thing we need to document is this whole DSCP, like, do we have enough documentation on people are already asking now? So what is it? You know, how do we copy that we copy it from the inner to the outer tunnel? Do we have to map it? Like what happens? I don't think anywhere there's any documentation showing how we manage the DSCP in the outer tunnel. We need to add that somewhere. Nobody knows what to do.
Okay. We'll put it in the points to cover with Michael then tomorrow. Did you have one more question, Mukesh?
Yeah, my last question was about there's a separate ENI ether and a ENI table. I just wanted to check if we can actually, so this is what we have today. So the top thing is the P4 and the bottom one is the SAI API. So
Can you show your screen again?
oh, sorry.
Thanks.
Okay. So this is what we have today. We have the P4 at the top, and so I'm just showing the P4 lookup at the top and the SAI API is at the bottom. So we have a MAC lookup into the ENI either table, which yields an ENI ID. And then that is used as lookup into the ENI table, which has the ENI parameters, the QoS parameters, and the VNET and so on. So one question is, so the SAI API also is the same way, because it's derived from the P4. One question is, ideally, the SAI API could have been also this way, where we just have an ENI object, which has all the QoS params and the MAC address, and it returns a ENI object ID. And the P4 then would have to be a single table like this with a MAC lookup.
Yeah,
which means that
right. I understand what you're trying to say, but that's not how SAI API is generated. What you're trying to do is switch key and parameter places.
Yeah, so can we have the autogen do this, like switch the key and the parameter, and if that works, then we could have a cleaner. Sorry?
Based on what? Like, what would be the criteria that would allow auto-generation to treat MAC, which is a key, actually as just a parameter value or the attribute?
So
of
one
GNMI?
thing, so one thing I was thinking was like we already have these rules where we're determining that if the key has a underscore ID suffix to the table name, then it's like an object ID, right? That's an existing assumption that we're making. So just extending that assumption, can we say that if one of the attributes has an underscore ID suffix to the table name, then instead treat that as the key and make the actual key as an attribute. So this way the API looks a bit cleaner instead of having two separate APIs to populate a single table, because these two could be going into a single table in some implementations and so on. So is it okay if we can do it this way? Hello?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be also true for VNET? How do you do VNET mapping? Oh, it's based on ENI.
So VNet table lookup, you mean? So that's just VNet ID is the key, and then you get the VNI as the. So that's okay for now. Only the VNI we are actually having. So I think we have. Originally ENI was like spread all over the place, and we had multiple small tables, right? So I think most of that you have already cleaned up. The only two things that was left was one was the ENI to VNI, which is now a separate VNet table, and then this ENI either and ENI are the only two things that remain. So if you can combine that, then ENI will be a clean object in the SAI API.
Yeah, but I'm a little bit worried about complicating SAI APIs that much. It's already.
So the SAI API is actually getting cleaner here. You mean the autogen? Okay.
I don't really see a problem with programming two entries. What does it really result in? You'll need to cache one of them for some time before actually pushing it to hardware.
Yeah, so this this again goes back to the same question of don't we want the SAI API to be as clean as possible, because the behavioral model is just for reference and for test conformance and all that, right? So now we are saying that because the behavioral model generation or converting it to the behavioral model is complicated. We want to keep a SAI API, redundant APIs in the SAI and so on. So it just goes back to what is the correct way of doing this.
Yeah, but look at it from the other perspective. How am I, if we will introduce more and more rules into SAI API generation, and it will, based on this or that, provide different look to the SAI APIs. How am I looking at behavioral model, then go to SAI API and understand what's going on there? If the rules are as simple as possible, it's easy to understand APIs. And look at the behavioral model as the expectation of how API implementation is supposed to behave. Now, if we will have more and more things like that, right now what we have is distinction between ENI IDs, meaning like object IDs and entries, which was native to SAI, so no big deal about that. And second, we had to consolidate ACLs, which is already a little bit counterintuitive. Now there will be another thing. I would rather have simpler SAI APIs that I can go 1 year after, look at the behavioral model and understand how the API will look like.
So Marian,
Okay.
in terms of just the orchestrator having to do 2 SAI API calls, that's not considered a burden in this case?
Like if we take switch as an example today, it also does things like that. There is a lot of implementations that have like standard IEEE defined lookup for the route. And what happens really in the switch is that there is egress port as a result. However, in SAI, we have multiple stages because it's easy to understand. We have from route to next hop, from next hop to neighbor, from neighbor to FDB, from FDB to port. But at the end of the day, there is like one lookup in the switch for the performance reasons where you go from route to the egress port. So, but it's much easier to understand if it's digested. Digested isn't the right word, but split into smaller, very well-defined entries and objects. And for those reasons, I don't know, maybe it's also a good thing, like to have QoS parameters as a separate object, like a QoS profile that you can attach to ENI. Then it will also be closer to gNMI on one hand, but on the other hand, we are changing APIs again, which I don't really like that much. But having them consolidated into one, I know that's how it looks in hardware, but that's not that easy to understand. Looking at
no, it's not just the hardware.
Also,
yeah.
Logically,
As
also
a concept,
like there's
logic,
one ENI
yeah.
concept.
Yeah, so the Mac is just an attribute of the ENI, right? So you have an ENI object, and
yeah, that's my point. Mac is not the attribute. Map is what you map your ENI from. It's not the attribute. You do not derive.
That's in the pipeline, right? So the pipeline views it that way. But
what's the behavior? Do we identify ENI by Mac, or do you identify Mac by ENI? What's the behavior?
Yeah, okay. So it's just a way of looking at the object versus looking at how the pipeline lookup happens, I guess.
Yeah, so I was looking at more like ENI as an interface. The interface has Mac, there are some properties associated with that. Looking at it that way.
Yeah, if it was a physical interface, like for example, standard SAI API has that. If it's a router interface in standard SAI API, then I agree, you derive Mac from the interface. In this case, what we really do, we derive interface from Mac because we are virtualizing the interface. So I would rather keep it this way.
Okay, then how about like having a MAC and then still a single object, but MAC as the key? The thing with that is then the ENI ID has to be provided by the ARC agent.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is the ENI being an entry and not an object ID.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, but that's why we introduced object IDs, because like we are kind of having this virtual entry. Same for VNET again. You derive VNET from ENI. Again, you have same thing. You have ENI as your key, and you map it to a VNET as part of the ENI lookup. But then from VNET being an object is a nice abstraction to use it in multiple places where you have to match on VNET. Because later on, let's go to a route lookup where ENI is part of the key. Then you really need an ENI ID as an abstraction to provide it as a key there, and Orc agent won't supply you with such an ID. That's why the SAI API is done in a way that SAI implementation provides you with a key, with an object, and not vice versa. You do not define a handle. That's, by the way, like the common paradigm for any API. You call the API, it gives you a handle. That's what we're doing here with the ENI, with the VNET.
Okay. Yeah, just a question of if we tie these SAI API so closely to the pipeline, it's always,
it's like
we feel it's because the pipeline may look up the same table in multiple different places with different keys and stuff like that, right? So then each of those would become a separate SAI API, and yeah, tying it so closely to the behavioral model is basically the underlying question, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess for this one, then we're going to be continuing with the same way as it is today.
I'd rather do that, yeah.
Okay.
So we are way over on time. Is there more for today? Chris, Marian, anyone on the call?
No, I guess we have a lot of work to do offline as well, like all the outstanding pull requests.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. So for the next meeting, then do we have any AIs for the next meeting?
More pull requests, I guess.
More pull requests. Okay. Okay. Thanks. I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks, everybody. I'll go ahead and post it like normal once I get it.